turning your Bibles now, if you will, to Philippians 1, and we're going to look at verse 19. I do love going to Israel. I should tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a professor at Southeastern University, and as a matter of fact, I was just talking to somebody, my daughter is in your class. And I was like, well, I'll be darned. And actually, she's in 2 of the classes. And so I love being a professor. I was a pastor for 19 years. And I loved being a pastor and would have probably continued being a pastor. But when I got my PhD, I thought God would not be that cruel. At some way, he really is planning for me to segue. And he did. He segued me. And I have to be honest with you. Why do I like it so much? Because I can reuse my jokes every 4 years. So we're looking at Philippians 1:19. Now, I want to set the context for you. Paul is in prison. We believe that he's in prison at Rome. By the way, he might be looking at death. And as you know, or probably know, Paul is going to be beheaded. The difference between a crucifixion and a beheading was Paul's a Roman citizen, and he has the right to a quick death. Doesn't mean that if you've been found guilty of a capital crime, and Christianity was a capital crime at this point, that you're not going to die. And in fact, he is going to die. In Philippi, he's already been beaten and left in jail. I don't know if you remember the story. He is in jail, and Paul and Silas were singing praises to God. How many of you would be singing praises to God after being beaten? This is a very interesting point, isn't it? But their faith was so strong, and they believed so much in the Lord, that they couldn't keep that joy down inside of them, and it just burst forth. They began to sing, and the prison doors swung open. And so this is where Paul is writing, or excuse me, this is the people to whom Paul is writing, the Philippians. We think he's in Rome, and this is where he says, "For I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Christ Jesus." What's Paul saying? He's saying, wherever I am, God will take care of me. I'm in jail now, I understand it, but he's going to take care of me even here. According to my earnest expectation and my hope that in nothing shall I be ashamed. Here's what he's saying. It'd be easy to give up now. Things aren't going for me, Lord. Here I've been preaching your word, and look at me, I'm in jail. But Paul says that I shall not be ashamed, that with all boldness and always, so now also with Christ, shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. In other words, my goal is to glorify Christ. And if the end of this jail sentence is that I'm to die, then I will glorify Christ in my death. But as long as I have breath, I'm going to keep telling people about Jesus. And so he says this, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And so this is the cry of every Christian, or it should be our goal to say, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. How is it gain? I'm going to go be with the Lord. But if in the flesh I live, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet, what shall I choose? I know not. As a matter of fact, he says there's a struggle. The Greek word here is a tearing between two parts, and he says literally, I'm being torn. I can see that I can do the work for Christ here. But if you're asking me personally, what's better for me? There's no question, to be with Christ. For if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. For I'm torn straight between two, having a desire to depart. So if you ask it, there it is right there. What would you like to do, God? What would you like to do, Paul? What would you have me do, oh Lord? If Paul could answer for God, he would say this, take me now, take me now. How different the view of Paul than most of us. He wants to be with the Lord. That's his goal. That's where he's headed. For having a desire to depart, to be with Christ, listen to him, which is far better. This is our hope. I remember going behind my grandmother's casket on the way to her funeral when I was just 17, 18 years old. And I remember saying to myself, if there's nothing after this, then all of this is a joke. But thanks be to God, there's more. Verse 24. Nevertheless, if I abide in the flesh, it is more needful or helpful for you. Let's pray. Jesus, we come before you now, and we thank you for the great opportunity that we have to hear your word. And Father, we do understand to live as Christ and to die as gain. But Father, I want to live for you. I just don't want to have words. I don't want to just mouth them. I want to actually do it. I want to live for you. But I realize that when I depart this earth, it will be even better. And so I pray that I would have a heavenly mindset and work for your kingdom here on earth. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows forth his handiwork. Next one. And I'm going to tell you that in verse 2 it says something. Day unto day it utters speech, and night unto night it showeth forth knowledge. Verse 3. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Verse 4. Their line is going out through all the earth, and their words to the ends of the earth. And in them he has set a tabernacle for the sun. What does the scriptures teach? The heavens declare that there's a God. The heavens themselves declare that there's a God. And Paul, when he was in prison, he began to ponder that he has a purpose and a mission and that he's headed towards heaven, except he knows that he's got work to do down here. Next slide. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the fact that Paul says, I feel torn. I feel torn because really I want to go to heaven, but I want to work here. And I want to tell you something that you may not be aware of. More and more very, very intelligent people are saying, there's a creator to the universe. Now, we could have known that by just reading the Bible. The heavens declare the glory of God. That's what it says. And you may not know this, but at the Oxford Anthropology Institute, they did a study on children, and they said it appears that all children have a belief in a higher power, that there's a creator, and have to be convinced out of it. This was the Oxford Center of Anthropology. Dr. McGrath said it this way: a little bit of science will make you an atheist. But a lot of science will make you a theologian. He should know, because he came to Christ as a result of his belief through science, actually, in biology. An astrophysicist, Mr. Robert Jastrow, says this: for the sciences live by his faith in the power of reason. The story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Next slide. And so I'm going to tell you that there's good reason for your faith. And so when I say that, in fact, that I can live better, I can live more logically, I can live as if life makes sense, I can live as if that this was not a chaotic universe that just sort of happened, I can live as if, in fact, there's a reason and a purpose for your very existence. People ask me, why do you believe in God? And I hold up my fingers like this, and this is an inch. Did you know that the trajectory of the universe and its expansion as it goes out cannot deviate 1/1,000,000th of an inch for there to be life anywhere? I don't know if you heard me. 1/1,000,000th of an inch. Let me explain it. If you want to get on a plane and you want to go to Paris, let's say, if you're off by just a little bit, that little bit just keeps going and going and going, and by the time you wanted to reach Finland, you are in, Paris, you're in Finland. You see, even the slightest deviation would, in fact, make all the difference in the world. And so a lot of people say, well, you talk about all this science and all of this math, and there's many people who have come to believe in God simply because the math in the universe is overwhelming. For example, Albert Einstein once said, I cannot believe all of this is a roll of the dice. He said the most incomprehensible thing to me is that the world is comprehensible. In other words, it seems as if the world was set up to be explored. It seems that it works very, very well with mathematics. It seems that we can make sense of it. And that alone is strange, because if in fact things were just chaotic and everything was just chaos and we came from a chaotic universe, wouldn't you think that chaos would be the rule? So why is it that things are so precise? Anthony Flew used to debate Christians all the time. And what many people never heard was in the final years of his life, he became a believer in God. And he was asked, why have you abandoned atheism? And he said, the math in the universe is overwhelming. The math in the universe is overwhelming. To what degree? The physicist Richard Colling says this: the number of things that have to come together at any one moment in order for life to exist is 10 to the 53rd power. For those of you who aren't good at math, let me explain it. That's not 10 plus 10. That's 10 times 10. Times 10. Times 10. Times 10. Times 10. Times 10. Stop me when I get to 53. Now, a lot of people say, well, but you're talking about things that there's a sequencing, and so smart guy, tell me this, what caused God? How many have ever heard that question? Raise your hand. Raise your hand high so I can see it. All right, put your hand down. How many have never heard this question? Raise your hand. That's what I thought. Only children. I didn't see anybody that wasn't a child who hasn't heard that. Anybody who's not a child who's never heard this question. Well, it's interesting because really smart people seem to ask this question too. Richard Dawkins asked it in his book, God Delusion, and we also hear David Hume asking the question, who is an empiricist from long ago. And so they seem to be saying, well, if you can't answer that question, well, then in fact there isn't a God. Boy, you couldn't be more wrong. So I go around every now and then, I do these things called doubt nights, where I just ask people to ask the hardest question you can possibly think of as it relates to God. It's a lot of fun because I'm sort of a high energy guy, and I like being right, how can I say, right out front, and so go for it. And so this guy stands up and he goes, well, no one's ever been able to answer this. And I feel sort of bad asking it. But you said ask any question, so here we go. What caused God? And he smiled. And I looked at him, I said, why is a tree a frog? And he went, what? Let's do it in here. Somebody asked me, what caused God? Stand up and say it. Oh, come on, don't be chicken. Thank you, Pastor Chris. Chris has been with me to Israel. He does not fear my craziness. He understands it and has calibrated it. So anyway, Chris has asked what caused God. Why is a tree a frog? Chris is saying, well, it's not. That doesn't make any sense. That's correct. Now, what the man didn't realize that I had answered his question, he just didn't understand it. And he said, what? And I said, why is a tree a frog? He goes, what? I said, why is a tree a frog? He goes, I don't understand. I said, that's right. Sort of hard to answer that question because a tree's not a frog and a frog's not a tree, is it? I said, so, sir, I've answered your question. You don't understand it, though, do you? He goes, not a bit. I said, let me explain it. You've asked what causes something that's infinite. Infinite things can't be caused. That's called a confusion of categories. As soon as you believe that something that is infinite can be caused, then that means you believe there's something prior to God. Whatever comes prior to God would be called God. Therefore, your question is the same as why is a tree a frog? You've confused categories. You confuse the category of God and finite. God is not finite by definition. He's infinite. And he looked at me and goes, well, I'll be dang. In other words, cause can't cause itself. And if there is such a thing as God, it always precedes all things. It's not possible that something that's called God could be caused by anything. And what you've done is you've substituted an infinite for a finite. God is not a finite. Next slide. Whatever begins to exist must has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Did you know that a little group of runaway slaves came up with this idea? Anybody know their name? The Israelites. Now, they didn't say it like this. They didn't say it in a logical form, but here's what they said. Ready? In the beginning, God created, can anybody finish it for me? The heavens and the earth. Did you know that there's no one at all, no culture out there that is saying that there's one God and that this God comes before time, matter, and space? That's not there. It isn't there. You may say, and by the way, I have a degree in philosophy, well, how about Aristotle? No. Aristotle comes after him. How about Plato? Yeah, it comes after Moses. And you may say, well, we even have a Pharaoh who says that the sun is God. That's true, but that's nature, and that's a part of nature. This says there's a God who comes before time, matter, nature, space, all of that, and he caused it all. You know why I'm a Christian? By golly, they got it right. See, because if in fact God is a part of creation, if in fact God's in it to the degree that he can't get out of it, then he can't have power over it. And in order for God to actually have power over nature, the creator of the box cannot be bound by the box. Not possible. Only one group got it right. Next slide. Your DNA is one of the best proofs for God. And even the co-founder of the DNA, who's an atheist, his name is Francis Crick, he says this: it is not possible in the longest history that anybody might try to possibly theorize that the DNA could have developed. Now, by the way, this man's an atheist. He does not believe in God. And you might say, well, how did it get here? And he said, well, isn't it obvious? An extraterrestrial brought it. By the way, God would be an extraterrestrial by definition. He's outside the terrestrial, this earth, and he's extra means outside of, so you haven't ruled out God. But there's another gentleman, you may have heard of him, Francis Collins, one of the greatest scientists of our time in the sense that he is decoding the DNA, which will be one of the greatest discoveries of our times. No question about it. There are already genetic things that have been found to be cured through understanding genetic sequencing. As a matter of fact, I don't know how much you know about genetics, but did you know that even humor is genetic? Yeah, if you separate twins at birth, they actually laugh at the same things. My wife does not have my genetic code, but my kids do. For example, like if she puts something hot on the table and it burns her hand, we'll all laugh. Is it true? And she'll go, what is wrong with you? You're laughing because someone's hurt? And we're like, yeah, I know. It's really funny. Is there anybody in here like that? Somebody trips and falls, you laugh? Yeah. You're a bunch of sick people, you know. Sick people. Well, humor is found to be genetic. It's something that you're born with, and you seem to laugh at the same sort of stuff. And for those of you who have not laughed yet at anything I've said, that's genetic, and that, my friend, is a mutation. Your DNA, one of the simplest concepts so far as organisms on the face of the earth. Let's talk about it. Did you know that there's a code to get into it? And that the reason that we haven't been able to do anything with it is we had to break the code. Well, I'll be darned. Who put that code there? It just happened. Oh, I see. You believe more in chaos than order. Right. And so chaos creates order. It makes perfect sense. Which is why we're always wanting order. Yeah, okay. So anyway, there's a sequencing in DNA, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. If we began to read, and we can say it this way, if I started to read your DNA, what's in you, and I had it on a piece of paper, and I just started to pile it up, what would happen is that pile would be about higher than the Eiffel Tower. That's how much information is in your DNA. Now, if I began to read the information that's in your DNA, I just started to read it, and I didn't stop, here's how long it would take me. 31 years. 31 years. That's how long it would take. And so what I want to let you know is it's logical. It makes sense to believe in a God that orders the universe in such a way that it is discoverable, as Einstein says. And I want to tell you that people do believe these things, and it works better for them. In other words, I can live better. What do I mean by better? More logical for sure, but also this. I can live longer. Duke University, you've heard of them? Anybody a Duke fan here? Yeah, a couple of you. Anybody a Carolina fan? Oh, the majority. Okay, all right. Boo. Okay, don't hurt people. Don't hurt people. It's not the love of the Lord. So anyway, at Duke University, they did a study on how long people live. They did at the medical center. What did they find? People who believe in God live on average 7 years longer than people who don't. 7. Now you say, I don't have time to come to church. How's 7 years work for you? I don't have time to pray. I don't know. How's 7 years working for you? You know, I don't have time to go to Sunday school. Well, I mean, you got 7 years. I mean, that worked a little bit. So I'm going to tell you, people who believe in God live longer than people who don't. This is not something theory of a preacher. This is Duke University Medical Center doing a survey on thousands of people, and here's what they found. People who believe in God. How about addiction and recovery? People who believe in God do 7 times better than people who don't. 7 times. Ever heard of Teen Challenge? There you go. 7 times better. How about depression? Bowling Green University study. People who believe in God, 50% less depression rate. Now that's just depressing right there. People who believe in God, 50%. How about heart attacks? Again, Duke University studied people who have heart attacks. What did it find out? People who believe in God get better more quickly, have less reoccurrence, and aren't in the hospital as long. This is what we call a heart-to-heart talk. And so I'm going to tell you, I can live better. Why? Because my life makes sense. See? This is what I'm saying. My life actually makes sense because there's a goal in which I'm going for. The goal makes sense. My life makes sense. And frankly, I'm just going to be happier than you because, in fact, I believe that my life has meaning. And so I'm just going to ask the question, I'm sorry if it offends you, but how could you possibly be happy if you believe that your whole life is an accident? How could you possibly get meaning out of that? And I always mess with people who say to me, well, I give my life meaning. Really? Seriously? That's a delusional activity if there isn't any meaning in the world. Let's flash up the next screen. If, in fact, there isn't any meaning, why would you give yourself meaning? If the universe is an accidental occurrence and you're a part of the universe, by definition, you don't have meaning and you got to stop. Why do people keep doing this? Because they need a crutch. They have to lean upon something. They can't face the reality that, in fact, in a meaningless universe, to give meaning would be a delusional activity. And so what is a person like who, in fact, tries to give meaning where there isn't any? I'll show you. This is what it's like. They go, I have meaning. I do. I really do. No, you don't. You are an accidental occurrence, devoid of meaning, and you haven't got anything except what you ought to have, which is depression. You're like, Dr. Davis is so mean. It's so truthful. And I'm really sorry, but please don't pretend with me about giving yourself meaning. That, my friend, is a psychological crutch based upon your desire to just survive. So let me say it again. I can live better than you because I can live longer. I can live more logically. And frankly, all the empirical data supports that I can live better. Some people say, well, it's just a placebo. That's why you do better. Well, fine, die. I mean, if this is what you... And be depressed on your way. So, Dr. Davis, that's not nice. I'm talking logic. I'm sorry the logic offends you. But that's what my PhD is in. And so regardless of the way you feel about it, in a universe that's an accidental occurrence, if you're part of that universe, you are by definition an accidental occurrence devoid of meaning. But it isn't just that I can live better, I can die better. And when you get to the end of your life, we really find out what's important because people do something called life review. And one of the sort of sad things is they look back and go, boy, I wish I'd have done this more. And one of the things that I've noticed about people doing life review, they begin to think a little bit more about God. My granddad was an example. And I love my granddad. But he would laugh when people go to church. He'd sit in the store and count his money, and he'd laugh about all them fools going to church. Except when he got cancer. And so when he was laying in his bed facing death and they'd already told him that it's terminal, he's not going to make it, he said, "Joey, come here." And I walked over to his bed, and he had a hand about 3 sizes the time of mine, big of mine. And he reached out and he grabbed mine and he said, "Can you tell me how to get to heaven?" When you come face to face with the end of your life, you see a little bit more clearly. Anybody ever heard of the Titanic? There was a group of musicians on the Titanic. They were led by a band leader named Wallace Hartley. They came to Wallace and they said, "Wallace, not enough boats. You want to take your band and get on one of the boats?" And Wallace said something that I think really nails it. "I know how to die better than you. I am not afraid of death." Then he looked to his band and he said, "Whoever wants to leave, please feel free." The band stayed. And Wallace turned to the ship's officer and he said, "We will play hymns as people are ushered into eternity." Jim Elliot says, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he can't lose." He should know he died for his faith. And I can remember when I was in Nigeria, I was fortunate that in the church that I was a part of, we did a medical mission to Nigeria, and we set up a medical camp where we saw 6,000 people who had never, ever seen a doctor. And simple things that could easily be cured, like hernias, you would see them, little kids just walking around with hernias sticking out of their stomach, easily curable. And so many things. People came from miles and walked for hours and days to get to the clinic. You know what we did at night? We preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because you can heal a body, but healing the soul is even more important. On the way home one night, the preacher that day had gone, or that night had gone a long time. I won't tell you his name, but I will tell you he's a doctor. PhD in this case, of logic. We won't mention his name. Anyway, it was like 1 a.m. in the morning. We were driving through the bush, and as we were driving through the jungle and through the bush, I felt the car slow down, and I was actually asleep. I opened my eyes, and there was a man standing in front of us with a rifle. Wasn't a good scene because there wasn't anybody around for miles. And so as the Jeep slowed down, there was an embankment on both sides, and 2 men stood up, and they both had rifles also. And I looked in the back, and walking towards our car was a man with a machete. And the medical doctor said to me, "What do you think is our best shot here?" Shouldn't have used those terms. And I said, "I think probably getting robbed is probably the best." And he looked at me and he said, "I suppose I won't ask worst case scenario." And I said, "I think that would be wisdom." The man in the driver's seat began to yell at the person with the gun. "No, no, 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 don't yell at people with guns in the middle of the jungle where no one can see you." And the man with the gun began to yell back. And then the guy in the seat next to him begins to yell at him. And I'm thinking, we're dead. We're dead. That's all that. So a lot of people ask me, how did the story end? I lived. Well, what's the in-between there? Well, as they're yelling at each other, I'm thinking, okay, this is where I die. And I remembered my daughter hugging my neck before I went and begging me, "Daddy, please don't go. I'm afraid you won't come back." And I sat down with her and I said, "No, honey, we're here to live for Christ." Remember Paul's words? And so I remembered that she begged me not to go. I had a long talk with her about what is our life about? Why are we here? What's the point of us being here? Don't you think it has something to do with telling people about Jesus? And she said, Daddy, let someone else go. I said, that's not the way this works, honey. And as I was thinking about it, I thought, I'll never see my family again. And then something happened that may be the most remarkable thing that's ever happened to me. I thought to myself, if I die tonight, I die a happy man. And I thought, what better way to go? We all got to go sometime. I mean, here I am. I'm helping people who've never seen a doctor, 6,000 people who've never actually ever seen a doctor. We're healing them in body, soul, and spirit, and I'm telling them about the good news of Jesus Christ. And so if I die today, I die doing the Lord's work. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Well, at this point, an old man came out of the jungle, and he walked up to the young man, and he went like this. And in this culture, elders get to say. And so when he goes, shh, that means I don't want to hear anymore. The young man wasn't listening, and so he did it again. Shh, shh, shh. And then he went. And so the driver didn't miss the cue, and he put the pedal to the metal, and we were gone. And so I asked the people in the front seat, what were they talking about? And they said they were deciding what to do with us. And I said, who's the old guy? And why did he let us go? And he said, well, I kept yelling at them that we were children of the village. Do not harm us. We are children of the village. A curse will come upon you. And the old guy heard it, and he believed it, and he said, let him go. But in that moment, I realized one of the most profound and powerful things, that if in fact you've given your life to Christ, you don't have to worry about it. He's going to take care of you. And so anxiety is misplaced energy, because God's got it all in control. And when we moved to Florida, I was pastor of a church. I was loving my life as a pastor, felt the Lord move me. And my wife said, do you realize that thousands of people will be affected by your move? And I didn't up until that point, thank you. And she was just trying to say, have you prayed about it? Are you sure this is it? And I said to her, my life is not my own. I will go where God sends me. And interesting enough, she had felt the Lord saying this too, because she said to me, I will go anywhere with you except Florida. God has a sense of humor. Oh, was that what, Florida? Is that what you said? Of course, some of you are going now, not going anywhere, Lord, except the Bahamas. You know. I can live better. I know I can die better because I faced death, and I've been with people who have faced death. I'm going to let you know they want to hold on to Christ. And finally, I want to tell you, not only can I live better and die better, I'm going to tell you there's actual scientific evidence and a reasonable hope for the hope that we have within ourselves. And 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says this, we are not like those people who have no hope. And in the context of that is that in fact people have died and they were wondering, well, the Lord's coming, what's going to happen to them? And Paul is trying to tell them to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Don't worry about it. God's going to take care of them. In fact, he's going to bring them with him when he comes. And don't worry about it. He's got it all under control. And so what I want to let you know is that there is actual proof of life after death. You want to read the most current thing? It's called After, by a psychiatrist at University of Virginia who began to investigate this after numerous times where he had inexplicable things occur where he couldn't explain what was going on. I'll tell you what set him off on his journey. There was a woman who was dying, and in fact he went to see the person in the other room. What occurred was he had spilled some spaghetti sauce in his tie. He put his coat over top of it, and so the lady who was dead could not have possibly seen, or dying, I'm not really exactly sure which stage she was at that point. At any rate, she could not see what's going on. He talks to the person in the other room, and what occurs is he comes in the next day and he talks to her after she's had a near-death experience, meaning an out-of-body experience, and she says, I saw you talking to my friend. Well, how'd you do that? You didn't even know your friend was here. I saw you talking because I noticed the spot on your tie. You see incidental evidence which is overwhelming. And you say, well, is this the only thing? Well, this is a head of psychiatry, a doctor of psychiatry. I think this book is very interesting. A better book, Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven. And he's a neurosurgeon, Harvard-trained neurosurgeon, who's an atheist, doesn't believe in God. In fact, goes into a coma. He says his spirit came out of his body. What he sees is his little sister, who he didn't even know existed because no one actually told him about her, comes back and says, did I have a sister? But the best one, if you want to look one up, is Pam Reynolds. And you can look Pam Reynolds in BBC interview. And Pam Reynolds is the best, and I'm going to tell you why, because people sometimes dispute, well, we don't really know if he was actually dead. He says his spirit came out of his body. Of course, seeing his sister who he didn't know is pretty interesting. But anyway, you're like, maybe he really wasn't dead. Here we got one that's really dead and, in fact, is measured. And I wish we had time to show it to you, frankly. Why? Because it's unbelievable. She has an aneurysm in her brain. They can't operate on it, and so they tell her, bottom line is you're going to die. But she goes to the Barrow Institute, which does, frankly, sort of cutting-edge surgery on aneurysms. And what they do is they drain all the blood from your brain. And they make sure that you do not have any electrical impulses in your brain. And she is brain dead for 1 hour. Now, why is this so interesting and great for us as believers? Because if you have a heart attack, truthfully, we don't know when your brain stops completely. What makes us say that you're dead is irreversible cessation of the heart and lungs, meaning we can't get it started again. Okay? That's what it means. But brain dead means this. You don't have the possibility of having any sensation heard, seen, felt, because the electrical impulses are not able to communicate it. Let me explain. You have nerves in your foot. The way that you know that your foot hurts when you kick is the nerve sends information up to your brain. I need to kick somebody. Anybody? No, I'm just joking. You'll get a kick out of this. Anyway, if I kick you, what happens is the nerves from wherever I kick you go with lightning speed, and your brain goes, ouch. Okay? If, in fact, there's no electrical occurrence, I can kick you 100 times, you'll never feel it once. You understand? It is your brain that tells you, ouch. Matter of fact, I was diagnosed with peripheral neuropathy years ago. What does that mean? I lose nerve endings in my feet, and I can't feel things. Thanks be to God, that's no longer true, I'm glad to say. Thanks be to God. However, it could get so bad you could stick your foot in a hot tub and be scalded and the flesh would come off and you not even feel it. Okay? So if a person does not have any brain waves going through their brain, it is biologically, logically, physiologically impossible for them to hear or to process information. So what happened? During her operation, where she has no brain waves for 1 hour, what occurs is that she hears the doctor talking to the nurse, recounts the conversation, says it completely as it was when she doesn't have any brain waves at all, and what she says is that her spirit hovered over her body, she heard the whole thing, can even describe the operation without any medical knowledge previously, and she says, I saw it, I heard it, and the doctor says, not possible. But if you ask the doctor, you believe it. Here's what he says. She got it right. So what do I think this means? And Paul says, to live is Christ. That's what our life is. If you're all in, why not go the whole way? The thing that doesn't make any sense to me is that we would go in halfway. If Christ is risen from the dead, why shouldn't we throw our whole self towards him? But for many of us, we're trying our best to just step in the water gently. But let's dive all the way. Why? I can live better, I can die better, and there is very good reason to believe that our life will not end. It will go on forever. I'm going to ask the musicians to come up. Well, one of the great things about being a pastor, which I don't have as a professor, is people invite me over for dinner all the time. I don't know what it is. Failing people doesn't seem to get them wanting to cook good food for me. You know, hey, you know, I can give you a 59, you know, you came close. So people would invite me over all the time and have some awesome meals. And so there was one lady who maybe was one of our best cooks in the congregation, and of course I'd give out awards to continue people cooking for me. And she had me over and she said, Pastor, I had you over because I have something serious that I want to talk to you about. And I said, sure, what is it? And she said, well, I have DNR on my list and in my will. And so I want you to know about it because you may be there when I die. And I said, Anne, are you depressed? She got angry with me. No, I'm not depressed. And then she smiled at me and she patted me on the hand. And she said, I know something that you don't. I said, what is that? Well, I've already died once. You see, when I was 34, I died on the operating table, and the operation went bad, and my spirit came out of my body. And I stood in front of Jesus. And I went, really? And she goes, yes, and I'm going to tell you there isn't anything like it on this earth, and I can't wait to get back. And I don't want those rotten children of mine keeping me here any longer than I have to. And I said, so let me make sure I got this right. You want me to make sure you're good and dead? And she goes, exactly. I said, all right, I'll do it. And I said, so just out of curiosity, what happened? You're talking to the Lord, and now you're here. She goes, he asked me, are you ready? And I said, no, Lord. I have 2 small children, and their father is left home, and he isn't coming back. Will you please let me go back and take care of my children? The Lord looked at her and she said, I looked at him in his beautiful face. Can you imagine one day you're going to be standing before the face of God? And he said, are you sure? And she said, I said, yes. And at the moment I said yes, it was like lightning speed. She said it was from the time the Y started and the S ended, my body went back in, my spirit went right into my body. And she said, I felt the compressions and they stopped because my heart started beating again. And she goes, but there is nothing like it. To die is gain. And for all of us who have lost a loved one, I'm going to tell you there's hope. We are not like those who had no hope. She goes, Pastor, I just want to make sure that when it's my time, that nothing comes in between me and Jesus. I got a call from her daughter after I moved to Florida, and the daughter said, Pastor, I just want to let you know Mom has an aneurysm on her aorta, and the doctors say it's inoperable, that as soon as it explodes, she will die. So I called her up, and I said, Ann, I hear that you have an inoperable aneurysm, and that it is on your aorta. And she said, isn't it wonderful? And I said, well, Ann, there aren't too many people who would say that. And she said, I know, but how many people have actually seen Jesus? She goes, seeing him makes all the difference in the world. And she goes, so Pastor, I want you to do my funeral. And I said, I'd love to. She says, but I'm going to give you some instructions, and I want to be very clear about it. And I said, okay, Ann, what are they? Don't you ever say that I have died, because I have not died. I've just begun to live, and there is no death. Christ has overcome death. He has conquered the grave. And in fact, I will be in the loving arms of my Savior, which all of this time I've been waiting. So, ladies and gentlemen, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain.